It was a quiet, unassuming house in a quiet, unassuming town, Fall River, Massachusetts, August 4th, 1892. The sun was beating down, a sweltering summer day. Inside the Borden home at 92 2nd Street, things were about to take a turn, a dark turn. This is the story of a family, a wealthy family, and a crime so brutal, so shocking that it would echo through the decades. It's a story that begins with a name you might have heard whispered in a chilling schoolyard rhyme. The name was Lizzie Borden. And her story? Well, it's a mystery that has never quite been solved. Lizzie Andrew Borden was 32 years old at the time. An unmarried woman, a spinster, they called her back then. She lived with her older sister Emma, their father Andrew, and their stepmother Abby. Andrew Borden was a prosperous man, but famously frugal. Some would say he was a miser. He was a man of property, a bank president, but the family lived a simple life, a life without many of the modern conveniences their wealth could have afforded. There was tension in that house, a quiet, simmering tension between the daughters and their stepmother, over money, over property, over things left unsaid. That morning, the house was mostly empty. Emma was out of town visiting friends. The family's maid, Bridget Sullivan, was outside washing windows. Andrew Borden had gone downtown for his morning business. Only two people remained inside, Lizzie and her stepmother, Abby. Sometime between 9 o'clock and 10:30 a.m., in the quiet of the upstairs guest room, a horrific act was committed. Abby Borden was struck again and again with a hatchet-like weapon. Her life ended violently, brutally on the floor of her own home. But the horror wasn't over, not yet. Andrew Borden returned home around 10:30 a.m. He was tired. The heat was oppressive. He spoke with Lizzie, then lay down on the horsehair sofa in the sitting room for a nap. He would never wake up. He too was met with a savage attack, struck repeatedly in the head with a sharp, heavy instrument. It was Lizzie who claimed to have found him. Her frantic cries brought Bridget running. "Father's dead!" she screamed. Someone came in and killed him. The quiet house on 2nd Street was now a scene of unimaginable carnage, and a legend was born. In the immediate aftermath, there was chaos. Police arrived, doctors, neighbors. The bodies of Andrew and Abby Borden were a ghastly sight. The brutality was shocking. Who could have done such a thing? The police began their investigation, searching for a motive, a suspect. They looked for signs of a break-in, but there were none. They looked for a murder weapon, but it was nowhere to be found. The focus, slowly but surely, began to shift. It settled on the only other person who was home for both murders. It settled on Lizzie. Lizzie's story seemed off. Her answers to the police were contradictory, confusing. She seemed calm, unnervingly so for someone who had just discovered her father's bludgeoned body. Her behavior was strange. Days before the murders, she had tried to purchase prussic acid, a deadly poison, from a local drugstore. She claimed it was for cleaning a sealskin cape. The pharmacist refused to sell it to her. Then there was the matter of a dress. A witness claimed to see Lizzie burning a blue dress in the kitchen stove a few days after the murders. Lizzie said it was stained with paint. But the police? They thought it might have been stained with something else. The evidence against her was entirely circumstantial. There were no bloody fingerprints, no eyewitnesses to the crime itself. But the pieces started to form a grim picture for the prosecution. There was the alleged motive, a deep-seated hatred for her stepmother, and a desire to inherit her father's considerable fortune. There was the opportunity. She was the only one who could have committed both murders without being seen. And there was her suspicious behavior, the poison, the burned dress. It was enough. Lizzie Borden was arrested and charged with the murders of her father and stepmother. The town of Fall River, and soon the entire country, was divided. Could this Sunday school teacher, this proper Victorian woman, be capable of such a heinous act? To some, it was unthinkable. A woman of her social standing couldn't possibly be a brutal axe murderer. They believed she was being framed, a victim herself. But to others, the evidence, circumstantial as it was, pointed in only one direction. They saw a cold, calculating woman who had planned the perfect crime. The stage was set for one of the most sensational trials in American history. The trial began in June of 1893. It was a spectacle. Reporters from all over the country descended on New Bedford, Massachusetts. The courtroom was packed every single day. The prosecution laid out its case piece by circumstantial piece. They presented the conflicting stories Lizzie told. They brought in the pharmacist who refused to sell her the poison. They described the family tensions, the arguments over money and property. Their most powerful piece of evidence? A hatchet head, found in the basement of the Borden home. It had a broken handle. The prosecution argued this was the murder weapon, clean to remove any trace of blood. The defense team, led by a former governor of Massachusetts, was formidable. They systematically dismantled the prosecution's case. They argued that the hatchet head found in the basement couldn't be the weapon, as the police forensics expert testified it had no trace of blood on it. They portrayed Lizzie as a gentle, loving daughter, physically incapable of such a brutal act. They emphasized the lack of any direct evidence, no blood on her clothes, no murder weapon tied to her. They argued that the police investigation had been sloppy and unprofessional from the start. One of the most dramatic moments came when the prosecution presented the actual skulls of Andrew and Abby Borden as evidence in the courtroom. They wanted to show the jury the sheer brutality of the attacks. Upon seeing them, Lizzie Borden, who had remained composed for most of the trial, fainted. Was it the genuine shock of a grieving daughter, or the calculated act of a woman trying to win the jury's sympathy? It was a moment that captivated the nation, a moment that everyone talked about. The defense used it to reinforce their image of Lizzie as a fragile, innocent woman. In the end, the jury, composed entirely of men, had to decide. Could they convict a woman of her class and standing on purely circumstantial evidence? In that era, it was a difficult thing to imagine. The judge's instructions to the jury leaned heavily in Lizzie's favor, reminding them of the lack of direct proof. After deliberating for just 90 minutes, the jury returned. The foreman stood, the verdict was read. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Lizzie Borden was a free woman. She had been acquitted of all charges. After the trial, Lizzie Borden did not leave Fall River. She and her sister Emma inherited their father's fortune, which was substantial. They bought a large modern mansion in a fashionable part of town, a house they named Maplecroft. Lizzie, now calling herself Lizbeth, tried to live a quiet life, a life of wealth and comfort. But she could never escape the shadow of the murders. She was ostracized by the society she so desperately wanted to be a part of. The whispers followed her everywhere she went. She was acquitted in a court of law, but not in the court of public opinion. Emma, her older sister, lived with her at Maplecroft for more than a decade, but in 1905, they had a falling out. The reason for their argument is another mystery, but Emma moved out and the two sisters, it is said, never spoke again. Lizzie lived the rest of her life in that big house, mostly alone, becoming more and more of a recluse. She passed away from pneumonia in 1927, at the age of 66. She was buried in the family plot, next to her father, her stepmother, and the sister who had never been born. By a strange twist of fate, her sister Emma died just 9 days later. So why are we still talking about Lizzie Borden today, all these years later? It's because the story has everything. A brutal, unsolved crime, a wealthy, dysfunctional family, a fascinating main character who is either a cold-blooded killer or a wrongly accused victim. The mystery endures because the question was never answered. If Lizzie didn't do it, who did? There were other theories: a disgruntled business associate, an illegitimate son, even the maid, but none held as much weight as the case against Lizzie. Her acquittal left a void, a question mark hanging over history. The story has become a permanent part of American folklore. It has been retold in books, movies, plays, and even ballets. The famous jump rope rhyme, created long after the murders, keeps the legend alive for new generations. The house on 2nd Street is now a bed and breakfast, where brave guests can sleep in the very rooms where the murders took place. The story of Lizzie Borden isn't just a true crime tale. It's a chilling piece of American mythology, a story that reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying monsters can be the ones hiding in plain sight, right inside a quiet house on a hot summer morning.